Chair, we're live now.
Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, held in accordance with the local authorities and police and crime panels coronavirus flexibility for local authorities and police crime panels meetings regulations 2020. I'm chairing this meeting, Councillor Ahmed Boston. If we could start off with any apologies, please, Steph.
Mr. Chair, I've received an apology for Councillor Heavican and Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you very much indeed. And if we could move on to ask if there's any declarations of interest for matters to be discussed at this meeting. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Minutes of the meeting of the 11th of February 2021. Are we able to confirm that these are a correct and accurate record of the meeting? I'm happy to propose that. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, Chair, I second them.
Thank you very much indeed. I believe somebody has that was Councillor Aaron, I think, who's raised his hand. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'm very grateful. Any urgent items of business to be discussed at this meeting? Not as far as I'm aware, not that I've been notified.
So, sorry, Chair, to interrupt. Could we just take a vote? You've seconded the meeting, but please, are those minutes agreed?
Are those agreed? Councillor Priest, yeah. Councillor Moore, Mr. Ager?
I'm afraid I can't agree them, Chair. I wasn't at the last meeting.
All right, okay, Councillor Priest, thank you very much for that. But everyone who was at the last meeting are content that they are a correct and accurate record. That's fine. Yes. Thank you very much indeed. There's a number of items that were on the agenda that have since been deferred. It was my intention to go to the audit findings report at this stage, but I understand that Mark from Grant Thornton is running late. So may I go on to the amendments to procurement contract procedures and ask go to Surjit first, please. Surjit.
Yes, Chair. Sorry, just on a procedural point. With regards to matters that I think you're proposing on the agenda to be deferred, it would require the committee to agree those. And I understand, Chair, that you're suggesting, in order to allow a little bit more time for matters to be considered in relation to item 12, that agenda items 5, 6, 8 and 9 be deferred to the next meeting of the committee.
Are the committee happy to agree that?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Ager.
Yes, I'll move that.
Yes. Councillor Allen, thank you very much. Councillor Priest, Councillor Moore.
I'm happy to agree that.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Moore.
I'm sorry, Chair. I don't know whether it was my internet that cut out or the monitoring officers, but I didn't actually hear what was said, unfortunately, about deferring.
So a number of the items on the agenda request to defer them in order to allow time for item 12.
Councillor Moore, the items were to deferred agenda item 5, 6, 8 and 9, which are not time critical items, as I understand.
Well, I don't have a problem with that in principle, no.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Moore. I'm very grateful. Thank you for that. So if we could now move on to the amendments that have been proposed to the procurement and contract procedures, and if I could ask Hayley McMichael to present this report, please, to committee.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The Council is currently taking a review of its financial procedures, which will inform a comprehensive review of the contract procedure rules later in the year. But this paper sets out some recommendations for some amendments to the contract procedure rules now prior to that comprehensive review that are needed on a more immediate basis. And there are two areas of focus, both of which are based on advice from the Cabinet Office. The first is that following the UK's departure from the European Union, we have some additional freedoms as a contracting authority that we can utilise in our procurement processes. And contracts that fall below the value threshold set out in the Public Contracts Regulations 2015 may be reserved by locality, by which is meant region, and or to certain sectors, the voluntary sector, community organisations, or small and medium-sized enterprises. So this closely aligns with the Council's inclusive economy strategy, because it will allow, in the appropriate circumstances, for us to restrict the supplier pool that may bid for particular contracts. Cabinet Office issued guidance on this in December 2020 and set out the conditions that need to apply if we were going to exercise those freedoms, including a requirement to ensure that we're receiving value for money and that we're following our own internal constitution, which in these circumstances needs to be changed to facilitate this. The second area of focus is concerned with particular regulations in the public contracts regulations, regulations 32 and 72, which respectively allow us to either make a direct award of contract without prior publication of a notice, or to amend or modify an existing contract. There are particular circumstances in which this is allowed, and urgency in circumstances that couldn't be reasonably foreseen by the contracting authority is one set of circumstances. Guidance from the Cabinet Office is that the fact that the contracting authority has been responding to the impact of COVID-19 and that there is a lack of resources to undertake procurement activity fits that set of circumstances. And we do find ourselves in that situation where we have a lack of resources across service teams who are otherwise focused, within the procurement team itself, and also in our supplier base where staff may be furloughed, where bid teams are not available. So the paper is recommending that Rule 13 of the Council's contract procedure rules as they stand currently is suspended to facilitate use of this ability to direct award below threshold contracts and to extend or modify existing contracts in the circumstances where there is a lack of resources to carry out the procurement, where value for money can be very clearly demonstrated, and if we're extending contract but a satisfactory service is being received by the Council, and that the action should be for as short a period as possible before it's then put out to competition. In those circumstances, we'll maintain clear reports detailing compliance with Regulation 32 and or Regulation 72 and retain that report. And when we review the Council procedure rules later in the year, we will review this and make a further recommendation as to whether or not it's still required or whether it can be withdrawn. I'm happy to take any questions. Liam Priest.
Yes, Councillor Priest.
Councillor
Thank
Priest.
you. Thank you, Chair. Just on the point you mentioned there around the change that in some circumstances we can make changes or give out contracts without going out to tender as we used to in the past. I'm not sure if this is a question for you or for a question for our external auditors. Are we satisfied that we don't, or we are not going to be increasing the risk or potential of fraud in that case, in cases where contracts are given under circumstances where they'd usually be more rigorously scrutinised, if you like? Obviously, my concerns stem from the fact that we have had difficulties in the past, and as any council has, and I think it's important that this committee has the assurance in this meeting that we're not significantly increasing the risk of that, and that's being looked at. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Priest. Is that one that Hayley you'd like to respond to, or perhaps
I can respond to that, Chair, yes. In appointing a contractor via a direct award, we would ensure that we undertook all due diligence checks that would normally be undertaken within a competitive procurement process. So it isn't that the contract would be awarded without those checks. The financial checks and all other mandatory exclusion checks would be undertaken.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Priest?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Priest. Mr. Hussain, I believe.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chair. A bit of a follow-on, I think, from Councillor Priest's question. I know Hayley mentioned that when we're extending, we'll look at value for money as one of the criteria, which is good. I just wonder, does the council know at a given moment in time what the state of value for money is across all our contractors?
Hayley, would you have an answer to Mr. Hussain's question?
Yes, indeed. When the contract has been let, it's been through a competitive process which has tested the market at the time that the contract was let. There will either be a fixed price of that contract so that it doesn't change throughout the life of the contract, or there will be an agreed mechanism within the contract for uplifting the price, for example, in line with inflation. So when we're extending the life of an existing contract, we're likely to be getting the pricing retained at previous year's prices and saving a price uplift that is going to be faced after a competitive process, because changes in market conditions and inflationary increases would be applied. So it probably benefits us to extend contracts. When we take a view of that, if we don't believe that value for money is still being achieved, we wouldn't seek to extend that contract. We would seek to take it out to a competitive process. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. Mr. Hussain?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, sort of. I think I know what Hayley's talking about. I was thinking perhaps slightly higher level than that in terms of, I just don't recall seeing something coming to this committee. It might go elsewhere about, I don't know, the top 10 contracts, say, by value, that are sort of coming towards the end of their tenure, and then the VFM metrics that clearly shows us how well those contracts have performed against whatever VFM metric was assigned at the time of striking those contracts. It's sort of a semi-question, more of an observation, Chair. I think it'd be good to see something like that, particularly in view of these changes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hussain. I'm sure that's been duly noted, and I think you're right in that respect. It's important that we have an understanding of that. Mr. Doyle, I believe you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I suppose it's just a little bit of follow-on from the previous two comments, especially in the light of some of those historic activities. Would it be possible for the committee to get line of sight of those that are awarded directly after the fact, so we get line of sight as to how extensively this was actually or is going to be used on, say, I don't know, a 6-monthly or an annual basis?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Yes, that can be reported.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions on this item or comments that
Chair,
colleagues wish to make?
Councillor Priest has his hand up.
Councillor Priest.
Hello, sorry, Chair. Another question surfaced in my mind as Mr. Hussain was asking his. During my nearly 9 years as being a local councillor, I have noticed, and it's not an unusual thing for the public sector at all, that products and services that we procure often appear to be more expensive than if a private individual or private company were to go out and buy the same. Do you think there is an opportunity in reviewing these rules, either through the changes you've proposed this evening or in the future, that the council could potentially save money and get better value for money on products and services that it purchases? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Priest. Very good question. Hayley?
Yes, I don't know if there are any particular contracts that you're referring to, Councillor Priest, but yes, there's definitely an opportunity as we're going forward to ensure that we review the rules to make sure there's robust checks of value for money in there during the procurement process. And we can always improve on that, and we will seek to do so.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Priest. Thank you, Hayley. Are there any further questions or comments on this item?
No hands up, Chair.
And I believe, do we go towards a vote on this item now?
Yes, Chair, we can if there are no more questions, if you're ready.
Yes, absolutely. Let's proceed towards a vote then, please, Steph.
So the recommendation is as set out in the report. There are 5 separate items to that recommendation, but essentially it's to recommend to the council that the contract procedure rules are revised. So I'll go through the list of members. Councillor Boston, for, against or abstain?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Allen?
For.
Councillor Moore?
For.
And Councillor Priest?
For.
Thank you, that's carried.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Carried unanimously. Very grateful indeed. I believe Mark Stocks from Grant Thornton has now joined us. Welcome to the meeting, Mark. And if I could please ask you to present the audit findings report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please can I just start with my apologies to the members of the audit committee. I was just unavoidably detained. It's incredibly rude of me not to have been here on time. So I am
not at all.
I am very sorry about that. So thank you for changing the agenda for me, Chair. I'm very grateful. So this is the audit findings report for 2019-20. When we issued the report, I'd hoped to be in a position to inform you tonight that we'd cleared all the issues that were remaining, but unfortunately that's not quite the case. So I will talk to those two issues when I get to the relevant section, because they relate to property, plant and equipment. But as we speak today, I don't think we can issue the opinion, and there's some more work that the council needs to do to resolve those issues. If I can, Chair, I will take you through the pertinent parts of the audit findings report, because I think it's important that I communicate a number of issues to you where I do have concerns, and where the council needs to think about how it can improve how it puts its financial statements together, but also how it can improve some of its back office services. If I could just start on page 3, this really is just to, having said what I've said, working in a remote environment is incredibly difficult. So both for the finance team that's had to put the financial statements together, but also for ourselves as auditors, it's much rather than having that conversation across the desk with the finance team trying to set up meetings and share information is much trickier. And the finance team, have worked tirelessly with us to try and get the accounts done, and I know they're as disappointed as I am that we can't quite get it across the line today. So given the circumstances, then with COVID, then the two teams have worked particularly well together. If I could just turn on to page 4 of our report, which sort of deals with the key headlines. I suppose I'm in an unusual position to report things that actually do impact on the bottom line of the council. You'll see that we've made adjustments to the comprehensive income and expenditure account. So fortunately they actually improve the council's it actually increases the deficit of the council. More importantly, as we move down, we've had to look in depth at the provisions that the council has in its financial statements, and obviously provisions there to cover you against a number of circumstances such as non-payment of debt or inability to collect business rate appeals, and that's been a very difficult process. And in the end we've had to adjust those. We've adjusted a number of provisions with the agreement of the finance team, and the net impact is around 1.8 million. Similarly, when we looked at cash and creditors, we identified a material classification error between cash and creditors. That's not something I come across every day. It's quite unusual for cash ever to be incorrect. I hasten to add that the council hasn't lost any money, so this is around where debits and credits sit, but it is it is unusual that a journal could be posted in a manner that would create this kind of error in the financial statements. And similarly, as we go down, there are issues around sort of debtors, sort of provisions for revenue grants, long-term liabilities that have actually sort of changed the usable reserves available to the council. So, and then there are issues around valuation of school land in the group accounts. So there's a number of things going on here which have made us I suppose uncomfortable with the financial statements. Now, the majority of those have now been resolved, but I will talk to them in a bit more detail as we go through, and I will come back to the issues that we've not yet resolved. So just moving over the page, I suppose the key story onto page 5, the key story of the audit has been around property, plant and equipment, and in terms of how we've been able to get assurance over valuation. And you recall at the last committee that we reported that the council didn't have a PPE computerized register sorry, PPE being property, plant and equipment rather than what we've come used to in terms of medical supplies. So you don't have a fixed asset register that leads directly into the accounts. So there's multiple spreadsheets. There's over 22 spreadsheets where you bring that asset base together. So that gives a level of complexity and risk in terms of error. And then the council also has both internal and external valuers that do different parts of the valuation, and trying to get I suppose the information from them in terms of how do we support the valuations has been very difficult. And the two issues that we're left with now, I suppose it gives you sort of some insight into where we are. So one is around what's called deferment. So when you value an asset, if you take a view that the asset is let under a lease, then you can do a reduction in the value called deferment. So, and last year a decision was made not to include the deferment, but this year a decision has been made to include the deferment, and that's created a £30 million difference. So, you know, on the back of a discussion with on the back of a discussion or a decision rather by the valuers, that wasn't, I don't think was effectively communicated to the council, because clearly if you were making that kind of decision, then you would have gone back to last year's financial statements and adjusted it appropriately. So the second one is to do with land that's held in the council's company, Samwell Land and Property. And again, part of that valuation is done by the council's team, and part of it's done by an external valuer. So the external valuers changed their approach to valuation, and has basically for particular aspects of land where they think under a modern equivalent asset valuation that that it should be valued in a particular way. They've sort of changed it from a valuation of something like £75,000 per hectare to £1.3 million per hectare. So that's clearly a significant change in terms of estimation. Now that decision may very well be reasonable, but we're yet to get the information to actually prove that. But that estimation has then not been applied to the valuations undertaken by the council's team. And so what we have is sort of significant material judgments being made on asset valuation that that don't match across the council. So clearly, you know, when we're looking at this, we're looking for the risk of material error. And as I sit here today, I still think there's a risk that the property plant and equipment valuations in your accounts could be materially incorrect, and that's not a place where we need to be. And you know, the council's going to have to undertake significant action now to try and resolve that, and I'm not sure whether that's going to take a month or 2 months before, or even longer, before we're in a position to sign off the financial statements. Before I go into some more detail in the accounts, so on page 5 we talk a little bit more around provisions, and you know, when we were looking at provisions, there's a disconnect between the people who were preparing the accounts and the departments. So the departments they're kind of managing the debt in a particular way, and they're coming up with a view, but that view is not based on what we would consider to be appropriate accounting practice, and then the departments aren't providing the right information to the finance team to then make those judgments, which is what's driven sort of some of the errors I was talking about earlier on. So there's I think there's quite a lot to do in, you know, in a number of areas in terms of process to make sure that, you know, when we get the 2021 accounts, that you know, we're not getting this kind of error again. Just moving on to page 6. So obviously we have to issue a value for money conclusion on the council. So as in previous years, we'll be maintaining the qualification on the value for money conclusion, and that remains around the children's service. So we're not yet certain that sufficient progress has been made. You know, when we've looked at the papers and the work by Ofsted, we're still not clear that the council, you know, is finally out of those issues. So we maintain the qualification, and we will look at that again next year. Okay, I'm now going to take you through different parts of the report, Chair, if I can, and just to highlight things. If I could take members to page 9. When we approach an audit, we sort of look you know, for the significant risks, and you know, one of the significant risks that we reported to you was around revenue recognition. So we've done quite a lot of work around that. So we haven't found any material errors that have led to a loss to the council, but we have sort of identified, as you can see, you know, a classification error where sort of trade receivables and other receivables were in the wrong box, I suppose, in the wrong classification. So, you know, that's a sizable figure to not be classifying it correctly. The second significant risk that we look at is the management override of control. So, you know, clearly there's a risk through estimation or journals that that there is, you know, that management may misreport. Pleased to report that there weren't any issues in terms of us identifying any misreporting or deliberate misreporting. What we did find is a number of issues around IT controls, and we provide more detail later on in the report. But there is a need to you know, to improve the IT controls to ensure that you're not exposed to potential financial risk. Just moving over the page. The next significant risk was around land and buildings. I've obviously talked through that in quite a lot of detail now. I'm not going to go through it in again, Chair. I won't reiterate what I've said, but it is an area that the County Council does need to focus on, and it's an area for significant improvement. The final area so was around the pension fund net liability, and I'm pleased to report there was no significant issues to report back to you. And then I was just over the page on page 12. I've already talked to you about COVID and how that was managed. In terms of the group audit, then the council has two companies that are significant enough to fall within its group audit. The first one is Sandwell Children's Trust. That audit went well. That's been consolidated appropriately. We don't have any issues around that. Sandwell Land and Property, again, that's continued to cause us problems. You know, the council set the company up for a particular purpose, but that purpose is moribund. There's no reason to maintain that company, and as I reported earlier, it is causing issues in terms of valuation. So I think there's cause for urgent action by the council to close the company down. From our perspective, it doesn't serve a purpose in terms of how you're managing the council, and it does need resolving as soon as possible. Just moving over the page, this is where the detail is in terms of the IT security controls that I was talking about earlier, and you can see there are weaknesses over a number of areas, and you know, management have said that they anticipate that will be resolved when you move to the financial ledger or the new financial ledger system Fusion. So you know, it is important that you know, you do monitor these areas while you're transitioning, because they are weaknesses that create some exposure for the council. So turning over onto page 15, this provides you with a little bit more detail of some of the issues I was talking about earlier. So in terms of the errors in bank overdraft and creditors, there's another one around expenditure testing. So, and then there's an issue over PFI disclosures. So I suppose this gives you sort of some view in terms of you know, the issues that we've been dealing with, you know, and the areas that the council needs to focus on resolving. Just moving on, Chair, if I may, to page 17. So this is where we start to deal with provisions and the estimates within the you know, within the financial statements around various areas. So so as you can see on the business rate appeals, where this is where you're basically, when you set business rates, then there's a right of any business rate payer to appeal against that transaction. So, and to go, no, you've set those rates high or higher than they ought to be. So, and it's important that you analyse them appropriately and make sure that, you know, you are adequately provided against any appeals. So so when we've looked at this, you know, we estimate that the provision ought to be somewhere in the region of £10 million. So, but where the council started was the provision was in the region of sort of 3.5 million. So that's a significant underestimate in terms of where you might be against those appeals. So again, there's a need for focus by the council in terms of that provision. And similarly, you know, as you work through the audit findings report, you know, we find smaller but similar errors in terms of how you've provided for trade receivables, how you've provided for housing benefits, how you provided for council tax appeals. You know, so, you know, as I said, the finance team worked really closely with us to try and resolve these issues when once we'd identified them. But there's a real need for the departments that are setting these provisions to work more closely with the council to make sure that those provisions are right before they go into the financial statements. Just moving down, Chair, if I could take you to page 23, you know, this goes through a little bit more detail in terms of valuation. So I feel that I've talked to you in some detail around our concerns around valuation. So I'm not going to reiterate that again, but I am more than happy to take any questions, particularly on page 26 of the report. We draw out some of the issues I've mentioned around the underlying record keeping that forms the basis of the valuations in the financial statements.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. And it's disappointing to see that the number of issues that we have before us. Can I turn to my colleagues for questions? Councillor Priest, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, like you, Chair, I am disappointed and more than a little concerned at the external auditor's report. I mean, the last time this committee approved a statement of accounts was when I was chairing it, which will tell you how long ago that was. What's ringing alarm bells for me is when our external auditors use words like a lack of effective communication, or the council must take significant action, or we're not using appropriate accounting practices in some instances. That is worrying to quite a large degree. And my question is not to the external auditor. It is, I suppose it would have to be to the chief executive as the person ultimately responsible for the paid service. What are you doing to address the concerns the external auditors have laid out? And what is the time frame to address their concerns, as they should be addressed very, very rapidly. Thank you, Chair.
Through you, Chair, if I might, and I can perhaps again through you, Chair, invite Rebecca to comment if she's able to. These were accounts for last year. Rebecca will be able to explain that we've already put measures into place following the identification of many of these issues by Grant Thornton, and those measures are already being implemented as we speak. Rebecca, do you want to come in and give a little bit more detail?
Rebecca, sorry, I think you may be on mute.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. David was breaking up. I'm not sure whether it's my signal or David's.
Sorry, Rebecca, I was just inviting you to perhaps give a little bit more detail. I was just explaining to the committee that the issues, many of the issues that have been reported by Grant Thornton for the previous year have actually been addressed, and you've put measures into place for those for 2021 to avoid those issues happening again in the future. And I was just inviting you to, I suppose, confirm that and give any comment that you think would be helpful to the committee.
Yeah, that's correct. So in terms of the provisions that Mark talked about, and we now have regular meetings in between myself, the finance team and the revenues and benefits team on a monthly basis, so that we both individual teams understand better what's going on and have more information in order to set those provisions more accurately. We also make use of Analyse Local to provide us with information on that as well. So we've got that process in place, and that's been in place for a number of months now. In terms of the journal entry that was mentioned, that there's now a more robust process in place for a senior manager to oversee those journal entries and approve them before they are processed. So that has been put in place. We have a working group that's just been set up to look at the asset management system and how we get a new one of those in place. Whether or not we make use of the upgrade to Oracle Fusion, because there is an asset module within that, or whether we need to go down another route, we're not sure yet, but we have set that working group up. I think that's probably it from my side of things. I'm not sure whether somebody from the asset management side of things wants to come in on valuations at all.
Yes, I'm happy to. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Most of you don't know me. I'm Chris Hilton. I've recently joined the council as the interim service manager for land and property, replaced David Harris, who left recently. So I'm relatively new into this, and I've been getting my head around it over the last couple of days. As regards the systems point, the way that we keep records and the way we make available records, a start has been made in procuring a new IT system. I personally want to look to Grant Thornton really to help us to understand what the gold standard is. You know, I mean, I think we need a clear improvement plan. I'd like to understand what's the best practice. You know, what are the best examples of councils that you work for? What does that look like, and how do we emulate that? So, you know, I'd really like your help if that can be set up to help us do that. The other thing for me, and you know, this is my take, the quality of communication between Grant Thornton, between our finance team, the property team, and our valuers needs to improve. And there are some quite thorny issues to wrestle with, which, you know, I'm struggling to immediately understand, particularly around the trusts and you know, the Sandwell land and property, and also some of the properties that have been transferred to academies. You know, as to what the right valuation assumptions are to make. You know, if we've transferred a property into a trust and under that transfer we're receiving a nominal ground rent for 25 years, you know, then what's the right way to value that, and how should that be treated in the account? So there's some thorny technical issues that I just don't think the team have properly got their heads together on, and I need to engineer that, and I need to make that happen, so that we're clear why the assumptions are being made that are being made.
Sure. Thank you for that, Chris, and it's reassuring to hear David Stevens and Rebecca Maha very much outlining the measures that are already taking place, and also Mark's comments that the team were proficient and efficient in dealing with the issues when they came to their attention by Grant Thornton. Councillor Priest, would you like to follow up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate Rebecca and Chris's responses there. I mean, the chief executive started off by saying that these are the accounts for the year before, which is quite true, and I understand that. But when officers are still using the words like "we need to get our head around this," that should have been done by now, really. And so, first of all, I'd like to make a suggestion to you, Chair, that at some point, an appropriate point in the next municipal year, this committee relooks at the issue, particularly around property valuation and asset registers, to ensure that processes have been put in place. And so when the external auditors come to do their next review of our accounts, they don't flag up the same issues again. I mean, I think it's a big piece of work, and it's a historic piece of work when it comes to assets, because I've had on more than one occasion in my ward residents say to me, "This is a piece of council land." The council said, "No, it isn't." And the council and the residents have gone to the extent of paying for the land registry document to prove that it is. And the council knew nothing about it. And I think we have to get better at this. And I'm not blaming the people who are there now, because this is something I think that has gone on for some years. But it is now time for us to get our heads around it and to sort it out once and for all, and to understand what we own, where we own it, and what we're responsible for, and how much it's worth as well. So it's not a question for officers to respond to now. It's a suggestion to you, Chair, that we schedule in an update on those issues around assets and valuations as an appropriate point of your choosing in the next municipal year, and this committee gains assurance for full council that the appropriate measures have been put in place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Priest, and I totally concur with that suggestion that is incorporated into our work programme moving forward, especially given the incremental role it's played in the unfortunate delays we've seen in sign-off in accounts, as you alluded to there. I think it's important that we keep sight of that, and I thank David Stevens, Rebecca, and all their teams for the hard work they're doing, because of course we are in unprecedented times, and while these issues, as Councillor Priest says, go back a number of years, we know the huge challenges on the finance department and the council more generally in terms of the distribution of grants and a huge amount of other work that they've so brilliantly carried out on behalf of the people of Sandwell during these very difficult times. But we'll certainly revisit that issue at the appropriate time. Now I have a number of hands up. I believe I had Mr. Doyle next.
That's correct, Chair.
Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Chair. And I completely will echo comments made to date, and appreciate the responses to provided so far, and very cognizant of the sort of current environment. But I suppose following on from some Councillor Priest's points, I had a large number of fairly detailed queries, particularly on the PPE and provisions bits. but I'm not sure that they're a great use of time, because I think I'll take comfort in the work of GT and liaison with the council officers to get to a conclusion for this set of accounts. But acknowledging that the comments David made about improvements to date, I'd be interested in Mark's view as to some of the root causes for the issues, because I'm sure that those were necessarily captured in the report, and whether or not he already had a view on any of those actions taken to date as to whether or not those are likely to be effective in addressing these for next year.
Thank you, Councillor. So,
thank you, Mr. Dawes.
If I may, Chair, you happy for me to respond?
Yes, please, Mark. Yes.
So,
yes,
so root cause is it's a good question, isn't it? It's something that we think about quite a lot. So there's something. So it's hard to articulate. So you need to think about how you work as a property department, and how you what effort you put in, and how you work with external valuers. So there's a process where the PPE valuations and how they appear in the financial statements need to be owned by that property team. You know, the finance team aren't valuers. They can query things, but the core quality control procedures need to sit with that property team, and that means not only the work that they do, but the work that is done by the external valuers on their behalf, and that includes, you know, the collation of information. It includes these decisions around, you know, do you apply deferment? What does it mean that you know, that the property is under a peppercorn rent to an academy? So those are decisions that need to be made to allow the valuation process to be made. So there's quite a lot of thought around, you know, quality control within that department, and then link to that, you need to give it the tools to allow it to succeed, and that kind of, you know, requires sort of investment in terms of the property database that it can, you know, so information is collated in a particular way rather than being spread across the council, you know, and then, you know, how do you instruct the valuers? So I think there's a whole piece of work to be done with that team. So the way that you're structured, then certain of the financial accounting decisions sit with the departments like revenues and benefits rather than with the finance team. So you need to think about sort of, you know, I know you're going through a restructure now, sort of, you know, where should those departments sit? And, you know, it's I suppose, you know, from my perspective, it's much easier for a director of finance to control these matters if they're directly line managing the people who are making the decisions. So you need to think about structure, but if the structure stays the same, and then there needs to be really clear communication between the finance team and the department, and the departments have to be responsive in terms of the information they give back, and the, you know, and following the guidance from the central finance team. So in terms of some of the other issues that we identified, like the cash and creditors and so on, that's around you being rigorous in quality control. So, you know, and enforcing the procedures that are in place, so that if somebody posts a journal that's incorrect, it should be stopped at that point. It shouldn't be sort of found later through budgetary control or cash reconciliation. People need to, you know, abide by the rules that are already there. So those are some of the root causes. I'm sure it's more complex than that, Chair, but those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's very helpful, and I think demonstrates the scale of the work that needs to be done and is being done, and very much homes in on the critical importance of the restructure that's taking place right now to really create that synergy, that one council approach that is so pivotal to all that we do at Sandwell. I have Mr. Ager and Mr. Hussain. Steph, do I have anyone else?
Chair, yeah, so we've got Mr. Ager, then Councillor Moore, then Mr. Hussain.
If
My
you don't,
sincere apologies, Councillor. Oh, yes, Mr. Doyle. Yes, please,
Yeah.
please do continue.
so, if to Councillor Priest's previous suggestion, if the council officers could ensure that some of those root causes that Mark has just referred to are included in the updates that we'll get later in the year.
Indeed, Mr. Doyle, I'm sure that has been duly noted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And my sincere apologies, Councillor Moore. I didn't notice your hand there. So I'll go to Mr. Ager, Councillor Moore, and then Mr. Hussain, if that's okay. Mr. Ager.
You're on mute, Mr. Ager.
Is that better? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
These are very important issues. I'm conscious, Chair, of our need to get to another important item on the agenda. I just wanted to really follow up what Councillor Priest had suggested. This whole area ought to be on our agenda for every meeting from now on until we are satisfied that these control issues have been resolved. It'll probably take us through, but I don't think we can leave it for, well, let's have a look in 6 months or 9 months. I think we need to look at our next meeting and the meeting after and the meeting after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ager. Duly noted, and I'm sure that the relevant reports will come back to this committee in terms of progress, and I'm certainly happy and content to ensure that it is a pivotal part of our work programme moving forward. Mr. Hussain, Councillor Moore, please. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Building on really the points of Mr. Ager and Councillor Priest before that, now this is a very critical report, and it is of concern actually in terms of its content. While obviously I take a keen interest in the problems, I'm also very interested in what the solutions are. And although there is some sense of an action plan set out in the documents, I don't feel the action plan is in sufficient detail to probably reassure the committee of the actions that are being taken. Now, I know we have had some commentary from officers in terms of some of the actions that are being taken, but really building on Mr. Ager's point, I think this needs to be on forthcoming agendas going forward, but I do feel we need a lot further information in terms of the actions that are actually going to be taken to put this matter right, and these matters right rather.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moore. May I go to David Stevens, please?
Yes, just by way of reassurance to the committee, I'll absolutely undertake to bring a report back to the committee with an action plan.
David, would you like to come in?
Sorry, can you hear me, Chair? Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you, David.
I can hear you, David.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Sorry, Chair. I was just saying I'll give an absolute commitment to coming back to the
yes, David. Yes, David, we can.
With an action plan to make sure that the committee gets comfort that all the necessary remedial actions will be put into place as swiftly as we can.
I'm extremely grateful, David, and for the ongoing work that I know you and your teams are doing. You know, we as a committee do recognise these are unprecedented times, but these issues, I think, and their importance is clear to everyone, and that role for the committee to have sight of that is clear moving forward. Mr. Hussain, please.
Thanks, Chair. Mark, thanks for that report. It was a thrilling read, but in all the wrong ways, unfortunately. I think it just to sum up, I did have one specific, Mark, which was around the bank rec. And what did you think of that, given that we're talking about things like cash and creditors and debtors? Was that okay at least? And just generally as an observation, it just seems to me you don't have to read far, Chair, to realise that there's issues here around governance, systems and controls, and risk management, the whole lot basically. So it's not just a 1920 issue. I just fear these are embedded issues that even perhaps go to the culture of things. And we're talking about things like a gazillion spreadsheet for your asset register. It's not an overnight job. So the root cause analysis, I think, needs to be given a lot of thought. I also think when I look at the annual governance statement, it's virtually silent on these matters. So that perhaps, Mark, needs to be looked at. We need something in there, I think. It's been signed off. We're seeing some of the same things rolling over from previous years. What we're not seeing are the things that you've identified through your audit. So that's it, Chair. So on the bank rec, Mark, I mean, the question was, were you sort of content with that? And the rest of it, Chair, was an observation. I mean, these are serious stuff, so we need to have a really solid root cause type action plan rather than something that's anodyne and sterile. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. So the bank rec was where we identified the 35 million error. So for I suppose for a great deal of time that did cause me anxiety. As I said earlier, it's very rare that we come across a bank rec that isn't correct. So but once we'd worked through it and we understood what the double count was, so then yes, we were content with the bank reconciliation. We do think it ought to be simplified. We can understand why errors would be made, because put it this way, it took me most of Sunday to understand what was going on sometime back in November to try and understand it. So if it's taking me that length of time, then something's not quite right. In terms of the AGS, I've not really thought about that, but I think that is something that I think that is a useful point, and it is something I'll reflect on with the council, because it may be useful to reflect some of these issues in the AGS.
Thanks, Mark. Chair,
thank you very much, Mark. Mr. Hussain, would you like to come back in briefly?
Just very quickly, just on this point about deja vu being here. I remember a couple of years ago, Chair, we raised this issue with the previous external auditor about the complexity of the bank rec. And I think back then we were told that will be looked at, it will be resolved and so on. I know we've had COVID since then, but given the magnitude of these issues and the numbers we're talking about, we just need some pace now and some tangible sort of movement forward. So we're not talking about the same things again next year or the year after. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. And I believe that the key incorporation of these issues into the work programme of the committee moving forward will play some role in that, as well as the huge amount of work that is going on in the council to look at these issues. Thank you very much, Mark. I'm incredibly grateful for that. Clearly a lot of work to be done, but very clear that there is a sense of clear cooperation and working together in order to ensure those issues are resolved. Committee, may I move now to item 11, exemption and exclusion of the public and press, in order for the committee to consider an item in private session in adherence with Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act and subsequent legislation. I am happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Do I have a seconder?
If I'm allowed, yes.
Mr. Ager, thank you very much indeed. And are the committee happy for us to move into private session? Councillor Moore, Councillor Priest, Councillor Allen. Yes.
I'll abstain on that issue.
Councillor Moore. Councillor Allen.
I'm against for reasons I'll explain shortly.
Councillor Allen. Councillor Allen, are you able to hear us? I think we have an issue with Councillor Allen's connection. Steph, is Councillor Allen still with us?
Allen, he is still in the meeting. He's on mute.
I think you're on mute, Councillor Allen.
Sorry, I missed that bit more.
So I think. Yes,
Yeah.
Councillor Allen, we can hear you now.
Yes, yep, okay, so yes, please, yep.
Okay, so you're happy for us to move into private session?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much indeed. So I am in favour, Councillor Allen is in favour, Councillor Priest is abstaining, and Councillor Moore is against. May I seek advice from the monitoring officer on this?
Yes, Chair, that's carried, Chair.
Karen, thank you very much indeed. We may move into private session then.
Chair, can I just ask you to pause 1 second just whilst we stop the live feed of the meeting?
Of course. Thank you very much indeed.